motion starts.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started today. Our focus today is going to be more on the Campbells, and we're specifically looking at that period from the moments they start thinking about restoration to about 1830. We'll backtrack a little bit next week to bring in some things related to the spread of the Campbell movement, particularly think through some of the ways that Alexander Campbell began to popularize his views on restoration. Don't forget that the study guide for the first exam is available on Blackboard. The first exam is February 7th, so coming up pretty quickly, so a week from Tuesday. If you have any questions as you are looking over the study guide, feel free to get in contact with me about that. Let me know what I can do to help you with that. We finished up on Tuesday by looking at some aspects of the life of Thomas Campbell. While in many respects Alexander Campbell has more of an influence than Thomas does, Thomas is still very important. And while Alexander Campbell comes to some decisions independently of his father that probably still would have led towards a restoration type of movement, Thomas in the United States has been kind of laying some foundation already before Alexander even gets over here, and so the elder Campbell is able to provide some guidance for his son and provide some more of a congenial spirit, it appears. Alexander Campbell in the early years appears to have been very brash, appears to have been very sure of himself, where the elder Campbell seems to have been, and you probably saw some of that as you were working on your essays. The next essay is due February 3rd while I'm thinking about it. So you definitely want to keep that in mind. So February 3rd is when the next essay on Campbell's restoration of the ancient order of things is due. One thing I wanted to say about these essays, I apologize for getting off track here. Overall, the essays that were submitted looked good. I know not everybody submitted an essay, but the ones that were submitted looked very good. The one thing I would suggest that seemed to be a common issue is that you need a little bit more summary in that first part, to really lay out what is it that Campbell is claiming. So I would encourage just not everybody, just talk a little bit longer about the particular article that you read from the assignment, and then some of you I think need to extend your thoughts at the end, your reflections. Overall, like I said, the papers look great, and I would encourage you to keep that up. But extend both of those sections a little bit. Remember that 500 words is a minimum, not a maximum. So feel free to go a little bit longer. If you want to go to 750 words, that's perfectly fine. Again, that's not that much more writing or effort, but overall, the first round of essays looks good, and so I would just make those distinctions. But we got off talking about that because we were thinking about the brashness of Alexander Campbell. Later in his life, some of that is modified a little bit, it's toned down some, but in the early years when he's writing the Christian Baptist, much more of a in-your-face confrontational type of position versus the more irenic, we might say, attitude of Thomas Campbell. I think a lot of that has to do with Thomas Campbell was interested in restoration eventually, but he's primarily interested in unity. And he comes to the conclusion that unity is only going to be found in a restoration of apostolic Christianity. But at the beginning, that's what his overarching concern is bringing Christians together. Where, Alexander Campbell felt the same way, had similar types of views with respect to unity, but his goal more so is to see the restoration of apostolic Christianity. So, they both had similar interests. It's just the level of what they are particularly interested in, I think, is reflective of their personalities. And so we talked about how even in Ireland, Thomas Campbell is wanting to see unity take place. Now, at the time, it's a unity just among the Seceder branch of Presbyterianism. That's predominantly what he's focused on. But I think overall, he's also concerned about other divisions within Christianity, and so he'll begin to become more focused on that as well as we go through. But his health and a variety of other problems that he faces kind of leads him to moving to the United States. That's kind of where we left off. That he travels to the United States in the year 1807. His friends kind of encourage him that that's going to be better for his health. And so he goes first with the intention that he's going to call his family later to come and join him, but kind of, prepare for their arrival, get a place where he's settled down, find a place where he's going to be preaching, etc. But although he is accepted at the presbytery with the General Assembly there in Philadelphia, and gets an assignment to teach in southwestern Pennsylvania, or assignment to preach in southwestern Pennsylvania, and preaches at a variety of Presbyterian churches there, Seceder churches. And does so for a little bit, but then trouble soon begins to follow him. It seems like the major issue that starts a lot of the trouble has to do with Thomas Campbell's practices towards communion. A lot of Protestant groups in the early 19th century practiced what could be called closed communion. And closed communion essentially was that only a certain group of people, usually church members, were allowed to, sometimes even were allowed to take communion. Sometimes it was only church members that were allowed to be present when communion was offered. And this has been a practice for quite some time. Just as kind of a side note, for example, George Washington grew up an Anglican, remains an Anglican, and then becomes Episcopalian after the Revolutionary War, and the Anglican Church has to be constituted in the United States because they don't want to maintain that connection with the King of England. But it appears that while Washington was frequent in his attendance, there aren't records, and there are records at that time, there aren't records that Washington ever took communion. Now, was he fully a church member? Were there reasons for not taking communion? Maybe theological reasons. It appears that Washington wasn't fully convinced that Jesus was the Son of God. So maybe there were theological reasons he had, but so this was a case of a lot of Protestant groups where there was only the opportunity to participate limited to a certain group, and that appears to be the case for Seceder Presbyterians even in Pennsylvania. Certainly, the idea behind Campbell being an old light anti-burger Seceder Presbyterian was the belief that there were certain, what's the word I'm looking for? Certain convictions, certain tests of faith might be another way to put it, where there were some things beyond just one's baptism, or even beyond membership in a church, that were a part of the tests of fellowship, the openness to communion. And so for the Seceders, certain groups of Seceders, things like whether or not you are supportive of some of those treaties and confessions of faith we talked about. So these will test the fellowship, and so if you did not believe these, then you were not welcome to take communion in a Cedar Presbyterian church. Now, certainly we're talking at a time point when the United States has become a country, right? So Pennsylvania is a state at the time, not a colony. But the West is still Ohio. I mean, that's the western borders of the United States. The Louisiana Purchase has taken place, but there's not an extensive immigration quite yet here in 1807. I mean, there's some taking place, but in many respects, Pennsylvania is just moving out of its frontier period, and because of that, there are not a lot of Presbyterian churches, especially. So, if you are a Presbyterian, you might find yourself going to, and this would be true for other denominations as well, you might find yourself going to a Presbyterian church, and you might not be a seceder, for example, right? So you attend a seceder Presbyterian church, but you're not a seceder Presbyterian. Well, Campbell is preaching at these congregations, and he knows that several of the people that are in attendance there, worshiping there, are not seceder Presbyterians, but he allows them to take communion, which causes some problems with some of the seceders there in attendance. So, allowing these people that are not seceders to take communion leads some people to start complaining to the presbytery about some of Campbell's practices. In addition, he's also accused of rejecting the idea that creeds or confessions of faith should be made in terms of communion. That maybe at this point he's already starting to move away from the idea that creeds or confessions are helpful. That instead they are divisive. They cause to split people, not bring people together. So he's accused of these things and a variety of others. Some of these accusations, it doesn't appear that were true. The one about open communion does appear to be true, but some of the others appear to be true. So he faces several different, he has several different appearances before the presbytery to answer these questions, and ultimately he's suspended by the presbytery. And he is not allowed then to preach in Presbyterian churches. Now, by this point, several months into it, he knows several of the people in the community. He knows them from back home, or people that have traveled with him. And of course, he's beginning to make friends and acquaintances in the community. And so there are a lot of people that like Campbell, like hearing him preach. And so he will take the opportunity to preach to people, but it will not be in a church setting. It'll be in homes, or it'll be in other types of situations, but not necessarily as a Presbyterian minister. He will eventually break with the presbytery, and really, whether he was, when he starts to get suspended, whether he really believes creeds and confessions were useless, he does come to that conviction. He does come to the conviction that they're not tests. They shouldn't be tests of whether one's orthodox or not. The Bible, for Campbell, becomes the sole basis of union. And does somebody agree with what the Bible teaches? And if they will agree with what the Bible teaches, then they are, and they will obey it, then they should be welcome. The simple teaching of the Bible should be the guide to fellowship and practice. Which is leading him to say there's a distinction between something that is a matter of faith and something that is a matter of opinion, or a matter of preference, we might say. And so there are those things that need to be held onto that are matters of faith, but there should be an opportunity for differences of preference and opinion. And that's kind of where Campbell is. Well, again, he's preaching to anybody he can find, and also, convincing some people of this divisiveness in Christianity, of the need for unity. And so he and several of his friends decide that they want to organize a group that is going to promote these kind of ideas. And they refer to themselves as the Christian Association, particularly the Christian Association of Washington. Now, the city we're talking about is Washington in Pennsylvania, not Washington, D.C. So they decided they're going to organize this community. It is not meant to be a church. It's not meant to be the start of a new denomination. It is meant to be an organization, a group, a fellowship that is going to work towards Christian unity. And that's the primary goal that Campbell and the others in the Christian Association have. But this is a voluntary association of people that want to advocate for predominantly reform. Now again, we're still using the terms of reform in a lot of this. It's not until Campbell really starts writing that he starts talking about restoring. Alexander Campbell starts writing before he starts talking about restoring these things. So every member was required to pay dues. They were to subscribe to the association, and that money was going to be used to support people going around and preaching, ministers going around preaching reform or reformation. It was also to be used to encourage kind of this renewed practice of religion taught in the Word of God. So again, there's moving towards restoration, but a lot of it's still reformation. And then also the money would be used to provide Bibles for the poor. So the goals of the association are reformation, get the Bible in the hands of everyone, but especially poor people who couldn't necessarily afford a Bible. It was to be open to anyone, and anyone who would serve as a minister was simply, to demonstrate by their life and their teaching that they conform to Christianity. They're looking for people who are morally upright, who teach what the Bible teaches, and people who won't rely so much on human authority, which would be your creeds, confessions of faith, rules of denominations. This is what they're wanting, is people who are going to maintain a focus on the Bible. So as they gather together, they decide that they're going to develop a document that is not to be a confession or a creed, but essentially the goal of this document is to lay out what the purpose of the Christian Association is going to be. And so on September 7th, 1809, Thomas Campbell meets with other members of the Christian Association, and so they're gathering here to create this organization committed to unity. And Campbell is going to deliver this address, and he's going to lay out the goals, as well as what's the foundation of Christianity that they are looking to promote.